Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Inner Voice podcast. It's so great to be with you today. I'm Dr. Foojan Zain. I'm a psychotherapist, author, and the originator of the awareness integration theory. Our conversation is about what matters most in our life, our mind, our thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. I want to share with you a good news about the new book that is published and out. It's called Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory. This is a collaboration with two of my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Nicole Jafari, who is a professor in, I think, 3 universities, Cal State Universities and Chicago University. And her expertise is in development of human beings and children. And I also, Dr. Eileen Manukian, where her specialty is early childhood development. So together, the 3 of us have written this book. It feels more like kind of instructional. You can look at it as a textbook. You can look at it as a guidebook, which takes you from the theoretical backgrounds to it from infancy all the way to adulthood. And whether you're a parent, grandparent, caretaker of children, a school teacher, someone who babysits, who's a nanny, someone who teaches actually all of these, all of it, it's going to help you because it takes you systematically through different ages and what their needs are, what their developmental stage as a normal developmental stages, what are their emotional and cognitive stages, and what can you do from the awareness integration theory to be able to do better parenting and actually intentional parenting. So I'm hoping that that would really serve you and support you in making these decisions easier for you and how to do them. I am excited in this episode to chat with Ray Arata. He's an award-winning diversity, equity, and inclusion leader. He's a speaker, consultant, trainer with global clients from the PwC to Verizon to Toyota to Bloomberg. He founded the Better Men Conference for the development of healthy masculinity and men as allies and partners. He was recognized by UN Women in 2016 as a HeForShe Champion for Change and received the Ron Herring 2020 award. We're going to talk about his new book, Showing Up: How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace. We had an amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope that you guys will enjoy it as much as I did. I'm sure you will. Subscribe to this podcast on my YouTube channel and connect with me through my website, foojanzain.com, or any of my social media. I also request for you to get my book, Life Reset, the awareness integration path to the life you want, and share it with me, your thoughts and how it has supported your life, how the effect has been in your life. I love to hear from you and get to know your thoughts. So here we are now, without further ado, Ray Arata. Ray Arata, everyone. We're talking about showing up. So thank you for showing up, Ray.
It's my pleasure and responsibility.
I love that word. I love that word. And what a beautiful timing for you to write this book. What got you to do this?
You know, a couple of things. When I wrote my first book, Wake Up, Man Up, Step Up, I was challenged by a guy I met in men's work. And he said, you know, Ray, you're playing a a 1-to-1 game, and you need to be playing a 1-to-many game, and you need to write your book. And I'm like, yeah. And one day when I was out running with a friend, and I should not have been running because I have a hip replacement, and I was running on this beautiful path. It was clear, and somehow, probably by the grace of God, my foot landed on just like a little half tennis ball rock, and I broke the 5th metatarsal in my foot. And I'm like, okay, I'll just swim or I'll ride my bike. And they said, no, you can't do anything for like 10 weeks. So a little voice in my head said, this is probably a good time to write the book. And I hired a book coach, and I wrote the first book, because I was at this point where a lot of my men's work experience it was all in my head, and I needed to get it out in an orderly format. So fast forward, I write the book, I meet a diversity and inclusion consultant, and she says, Ray, you really have something here, but you need to take your message into corporate America, because those men that look like you and sound like you, they need to hear this. And so she invited me to, or challenged me to go to a women's leadership event, hosted by Watermark. And I went, and she said, you'll probably be the only guy, just go and listen. And when I went there, listen, I did. I was the only guy there. And that's when it hit me on a deeper level. All those things my mom said to me as an Italian American woman, where all the rights and privileges and opportunities went to her older brother because he was a boy, and she didn't get the same. So click. Then I thought about my wife, who was the oldest of 7 in an Italian family in San Francisco. Her father, John Barbagelata, a well-known supervisor who ran against Mayor Moscone. And then my daughter, who was going to be graduating from Duke with a degree in computer science. Like, I realized, somebody needs to do something. Maybe it's me. And that's what had me create the Better Man Conference. And so, unbeknownst to me, when I created the Better Man Conference, a place for companies to send men, and anybody else for that matter, to be better allies and leaders, that put me on a huge learning curve, like this steep. And when the pandemic hit, once again, that little voice in my head said, it's time. Time's up. Me Too, COVID, Black Lives Matter, all these events have formed a perfect storm. Ray, write the book. And my buddy Mike Robbins, who's a 5-book author, introduced me to his agent. She loved the idea, signed me, pitched me, and then I wrote the book. So that's kind of the series of events that led me to write the book.
Well, everyone, since we're talking about it, I want you to see it. The book is Showing Up: How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace. And it is so, so necessary. There are a couple of things that I really, really enjoyed about this book. One is the word you use, which is taking responsibility for action. And I think that it was just so important. I heard you say in your book that, first of all, it takes a willingness to get here. 2, it takes the awareness, and then taking responsibility for your action. And what I loved, I read this in your book, says, when a male leader stands up in front of a room of men, admits his own failings, takes accountability for what happens on his watch, and publicly commits to be better, it's a powerful model to emulate and follow for the man in the room. It also sends the message to the women that men are capable of making the transition to be more inclusive. That is an appropriate leader, regardless of gender. But I think that is so important when you say that, because I think that the ego sometimes of men thinking that if I say that, I'm going to look weak and people are going to take advantage of the situation. So I have to always come across as this do not touch power that it's here. So share with us.
I'm very impressed that you did your homework and you pulled out a very, very important message in the book that I speak to all the time, whether I lead a training or whether I lead a conference. When my sponsors want to be involved and be part of the narrative, I ask to speak to the CEO or one of their upper level executives, and I have a little coaching session with them saying, your vulnerability, which means power, not weakness, because I've learned that my superpower is vulnerability. It's hard at first, but then the more I did it, the more the easier it became. That you're going to pave the way for other men. And so back to 2019, we're at the Better Man Conference in New York. Moody's is our lead sponsor, and the current CEO of Moody's, then the COO, him and I had a little talk because he was going to open up the conference. And I get an email from him 2 days before. He says, "Ray, you're not going to believe this. Got some feedback from my wife. I've got a story to tell." And he gets up there and he proceeds to say that, his wife's an executive at another company. And he basically said some things to her when she was trying to explain something to her. And she looked at him and said, "You're just like the rest of them." And it just went going, and it hit him. And he realized what he had done and the impact that it had created. So from a taking responsibility perspective, he took responsibility, because I talk a lot about what it means to be an ally. And over the course of our conversation today, I can walk your audience through the 4 steps of the ally's journey. But be that as it may, I realized how important that was. And so when I did the San Francisco conference, I was up on stage and I said to the guys, "I'm going to prove a point here." And I said, "Hey, to the women in the audience, if I admit I'm afraid, or I don't have the answer, or I'm, feeling sad, do you trust me more or less, by a show of hands?" And all the hands went up. And the point I was seeking to illuminate was that when we're vulnerable, we engender trust, which is the flip. We're not in archaic times where I have to hold my shield, and if I drop my shield, you're going to kill me. We're not in those times anymore. So a lot of what this is, from a vulnerability perspective for men, it's a rewrite of the narrative of what it means to be a man. Put another way, healthy masculinity, and how men and others are hungry for it.
Very much. I think what you said in your book is that there's a way that a man has been set up to live, which all men kind of try to be that. And then women also have subscribed, which is no longer working, which is they don't show emotions, always confident. They cannot show any of their insecurities. They don't ask for help. They don't even ask for addresses.
Or directions. That's the man box. What you're speaking to is the man box.
All the decisions, they have to make all the decisions. They have to be the provider. They have to be, sexually dominant, continuously play and talk sports, and they're never disabled or handicapped or unemployed. And you bring the other side, which that's kind of needs to go away, because that is not the truth. It's just the role that they've played, which it doesn't even, fit for them anymore. They're tired of it. Like, they're also suffering in having to be in that box.
That's exactly right. I say this has been lurking. A lot of guys, when I bring this forward, some of them say, "I don't do that." And the deeper truth is, these rules are lurking in the shadows. They do drive our language and our behavior. And if we can't own how we're capable, then unconsciously we'll step into one of those things. And one of the best things I invite men to consider is get curious about, and get interested, and get invested in how others experience you.
As you were talking about this showed up for me in 2 ways. The healthy man that you talk about is sharing experience, emotions, admitting to themselves and others that, they don't have the answer, that it's okay, and ask for help and contribute, to decision making. So there's one aspect of the toxic masculinity that I think a lot of times people share with each other, is that when a man which is has a little bit more of the feelings, and has the respect and the decision making with their wives, there's a lot that is said sometimes by men to even ridicule them. They call them whipped. I won't say the, the first word, but just
yeah, I know.
And then it's almost like, although they would have to, they love to be able to do this cooperative stance with their mate and decision makings and all of that. But when they gather in a party or at work with a bunch of men, then they have to pretend that they're completely somebody else and ridicule women and, look at women in a different way and objectify them. Or it's very interesting in how the role changes suddenly, because they have to go into the box and perform in order to even be accepted by other men, even if none of them are the same out of that like little party that they are. Like they might come in and play this role with each other and huff and puff.
Yeah.
And then all of them might actually go and really enjoy being who they are. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, generationally, the behaviors you're speaking to is more prevalent with people in my age group. Now I'm 59, so that includes guys in their mid to late 40s up into their 70s. So there's that. And what I say to that is, and I can say this as a strong, emotionally aware, very capable of being vulnerable man, that let them have at me, because all that, when they open up their mouths and say that kind of stuff, it tells me a lot more about them and their insecurity. So when guys react that way, unless they're emotionally literate and they've done work on themselves, they're speaking from a place of insecurity. And so as a white cisgendered, male guy, if the worst thing that's going to happen to me when I step into allyship or being a leader is that I'm going to be made fun of, as opposed to being a man of color or a man who identifies from the LGBTQI community, that I could actually be killed or hurt, then I can take a breath and keep going and not let those schoolyard immature antics prevail. So that's just me. And at the same time, I'm always encouraging men to get past that. Now, that's my generation. You look to the younger generation, my son's going to be 28 in September. So his age group all the way up to late 30s, they've figured out a lot of this stuff already. And so it's not as much of an issue for them. Now the pendulum has swung, so they have their own set of issues that they need to come around to. But by and large, this is the patriarchy and power dynamics that I want to dismantle, which is why this year, when we do our Better Man Conference on November 2nd in New York and San Francisco, same day, same time, along with a virtual audience, we're going to dismantle patriarchy, power and privilege, and contemplate positive patriarchy, sharing of power, use of privilege, right? And so, my message to the men, regardless of what your age group is to consider, like I said earlier in our conversation, how do you want to be experienced? Do you want to be experienced by people around you as that guy, the dinosaur that is, at the whim of toxic masculinity? Or think about your wife or sister or mother or kids or colleagues, because they're watching you. And you do have a choice.
Yes. But when you said that, this showed up for me where the United States is a great melting pot of a lot of different cultures. Now, many countries around the world are still pretty much a patriarch, and you can't necessarily, like, beyond Northern Europe, most of the other countries are still uphold a lot of patriarchal systems. So when you have the group who are from those countries, they're immigrants, they're working in the business systems around the world, in the United States, and they're part of the company. How does that concept of let's shift the patriarchal construct of what we just talked about, men in the box, they make decisions, this is what they do, they make the real decisions. How have you experienced that when you come into a company which has all of this type of diversity, which completely different backgrounds, which, as you said, even when they go home, even if they're living in US, but they go home and they go into the same culture that has been fed from wherever they're from. For example, originally I'm from Iran. That is a patriarchal system.
That's right.
Right. So it's almost like, and I have a lot of clients, I'm a therapist, I have a lot of clients from Middle East.
Yeah.
A lot of people who are listening to us might also come from that. So the word, like we're dismantling that type or bringing a healthy patriarchal system might have like,
Yeah.
What are you doing? What are your thoughts about this?
So there's systemic and there's personal. And what I will tell you is there is a global shift. And I've worked with audiences from around the world. The EMEA region is hungry for this. The UK, Western Europe, to some degree, Eastern Europe. And there's a common through line for all of them, and that's the heart. And so I seek to appeal to the human inside the man, the heart inside the man, and at the same time, culturally sensitive that I'm an American, Italian American, and I'm aware of what it's like here, but the same pushback that you're speaking to in other cultures, I experience here. So my personal decision is to keep going and to bring the heart forward. Ultimately, it's going to be their choice. And so those men have beating hearts, and they have daughters, and they have sons, and they have wives. So whether I shift the conversation to respect, right, and love, and whatever the case may be, I'll do whatever I need to do to get these guys thinking and feeling. Regardless of culture, they don't need to be an ass, right? They don't. And so, and when I go international, I liaison with somebody on the ground so that as a coming into a different company culture, I don't get spit out or rejected like a virus that they don't want. So that's part of my culture work in the background. One has to understand the ecosystems inside a company and inside a culture. So the only thing that can permeate that is heart. That's it.
There's another stigma, or let's say behavioral pattern that has shown that there's been a lot of research on it. And I wanted to know what your perspective was. In the old town, they say, when a man has two pans, meaning when a man gets wealthy and powerful.
Yes.
That they decide that it's okay to have affairs, to have, things that are, to act in a way that is more objectifying people around them, including other women. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's the ill effects of having power and ego unchecked, and a demonstration of what I would say, in my work, I often talk about how, when I did my men's weekend in 1999, because I got feedback from my then wife and work, I said, I learned that the pained little boy in me was driving the adult bus. And so when men step in to do that and they start justifying their behavior, that tells me who's driving the bus. It's not the mature, inclusive leader. It's the angry teenager that wants to get his, and he's not thinking about anybody else, right? And society perpetuates that and makes it quote unquote okay. But if you look around with how fast social media is bringing to light things that are happening, more people and more voices are coming forward. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just a matter of time. where things are going to change. And right now you have a lot of men who are, I talk about this in my book, The 5 States of Men That Exist Inside Orgs. One of them is a group of men that feel threatened by diversity initiatives because it threatens their job, the operative word being there. That's their unexamined privilege. That's the same group of men, the white men, that say all this attention on white men is a distraction. Well, if you're a white male guy, of course it is. But once again, there's your privilege. And there's a way to flip all this. There's another group that don't feel included because inside companies, there's groups for women, people of color, LGBTQIA, but they're saying, what about me? That group can be converted because they're temporarily feeling excluded. The biggest group are the ones that are afraid to say or do the wrong thing, so they do nothing. That group is significant. And then there's a group that want to know what to do, but they don't know what to do. And then there's the few, the proud, the allies in training. So these groups all have required different approaches to them. And the word I would want to offer you and your listeners is what we're really trying to do here at the end of the day is to activate men, to activate them.
The word that keeps coming to me as I read your book is becoming an adult, becoming a mature. And you said that going from, staying into the teenage mode for a lifetime, taking on the adulthood as you are after 20 some years of age, stop acting like, someone who's not responsible or that their frontal cortex is not all completed. Since it is, then let's do that. One of the things that I really enjoyed, and I said that to you before the show, is throughout the years, most of the attention, rightly so, also has gone to empowering women around the world who have not been empowered, whether they weren't empowered because of the man's role or the women's role who had bought into the man's role and lost their own, or if they wanted to fit into the business world and industry. Right. Survive, they needed to also uphold those type of cultural rules in order to survive, and they learned their own games and manipulative way of doing it. So a lot has gone to empowering women, getting them in independence and wealth and power and laws and everything, which is beautiful. But in the process, I think that when men were trying to take care of themselves, it would be this type of rebelliousness in upholding the power, as if the power was being taken away from them by shedding light on this side. But the conferences you're creating in this book, it's so much about bringing the two sides that work. So the parts of what we knew about masculinity and femininity that worked, and bringing it and balancing it in a human being. And for the men to not only have their power, but also have their power of vulnerability and emotion. A lot of your book is actually teaching men in how to feel their emotion, express their emotion, deal with their emotion. And it's really, really needed, because I, again, in 30 years of working with men and men in power, one of the most important factor that I've seen in the room is their ability to feel safe and truly experience their emotion and express it. And it has totally changed not only their relationship with their spouses, their intimacy, their relationship with their buddies, with their children, and at work. But the part that I like more about your book is that men don't have to only kind of be allies with each other in covering up and mischievous stuff. They can now be allies in upholding someone as a human being who does the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
That's right. That's why in the beginning of the book, I posed 2 very important questions to the men reading the book. One is, why should I care about gender equality, equity, etc.? And why should I change now? Mm-hmm. And it's a fair, albeit very direct question for men to ponder, because the journey to stepping into being an ally and an inclusionary leader, it's not a one and done thing. And it's going to require everything, their awareness of their bias, their privilege, their emotions, the man box. It's going to require empathy. It's going to require accountability, and it's going to require action. And so these principles, if you will, are critical for men to step into. And it's time, plain and simple. It's time. You're a therapist. And even though I'm not a therapist, my 15,000 hours, 55 men's weekends, bringing this work into maximum security prisons, that's everything that informed me to translate all this into the corporate space. And if there was one, probably the deepest context word that I would offer that needs to happen for men is healing. Healing. We weren't taught how to connect and feel our emotions at all. And so we're one trick anger ponies, if you will. I mean, just Saturday, I was invited down to do a bike ride down in Woodside by this guy whose name shall not be mentioned. And after the bike ride, while I was away from everyone changing, his dog got out of the car and ran around the parking lot, hit a car, and he exploded in anger, turned it towards the mother of his child and his sister, blamed them. And then none of this happened when I was there. And when any one of my buddies got in to try and de-escalate, he felt threatened and he almost went at them. This is a classic example of men not knowing how to feel fear and going to the only permissible. And that's why we have all these shootings and all this stuff that's going on throughout our country, because of emotional illiteracy. And so men often wonder, like when I do trainings, why are we talking about our emotions? And I'm like, well, let me give you an example. If someone comes up to you and says, hey, Ray, you know, when you said that in that meeting or whatever, it really hurt me. The first thing that's going to happen before I even know if someone says that to me is I'm either going to feel shame, or I'm going to feel afraid or sad, or maybe all of them, but I won't know how to respond. And before I know it, I'm going to explain away saying I didn't mean it, or I'm going to defend and I'm going to justify, as opposed to taking a breath and saying, I had no idea. I'm sorry. Tell me more. This may, for someone like yourself in your profession, this is stuff that I assume you help people begin to understand and then emulate. This is what needs to happen for men as leaders and allies, as fathers, husbands, brothers, community members. And so that's kind of why I exist on the planet, is to support men and moving from the old into the new narrative of healthy masculinity.
I love your purpose. Awesome.
Thank
you.
So
what you share in your book is declare for yourself an intention to learn more about what drives your language and behavior. I love this. Seek a female mentor and a partner and get curious about her experiences and how she's impacted by men's behavior. I used to work with a transgender person who was a male for 40 years. And then went through the transfer of becoming a female. And she stayed in the same company, and very a man-driven company. And I was actually very impressed by the HR and how they got all the people in her team ready for this. And even, the questions of which bathroom to use and how to be with that group. Mm-hmm. One of the things she told me was that people who knew her when she was presenting as a male, talk to her in such a different way. Uh-huh. And, the jokes they would say, or the way that they would treat her when she was presenting as a male was so different than when she became a female. And you really got these roles that we all kind of play. And that everybody kind of, it's a cultural perspective that we have. So when you say, get for a man to get a mentor who's a female, or vice versa, any female, get a mentor as a male, to really know what the other genders are, or even, at this point, a non-binary, to really know what the experience is. Other people have different experiences. And then you share about seek and secure a male support accountability buddy. So you could also share those concepts.
So what's the question?
Nothing. I'm just sharing with you what showed up for me. So throwing the ball right back at you to share what comes up for you.
Well, I've never heard of an example like that a company was committed and a team was committed. And I think that is amazing. And what comes to mind, one of the guys who has been on on our stage for the Better Man is a guy by the name of Sean Coleman. He's a trans man, and he has talked about a lot of this stuff. So the concepts are very similar. There's also a woman named Dr. Paula Jones who wrote a book, who was a male CEO of a large church group. And she talks about her experiences before and after, including but not limited to when she's on a plane. So it's been very educational for me. And my assumption is anybody who listens to her, or you're the person you spoke to, that it's a great opportunity for us to re-examine and become more aware around the individual that we're speaking to.
There's a lot in your book about respecting the responsibility that you have, respecting the accountability, but respecting yourself, your emotions, your needs, and others. You also shared about the heart being the character, like growth, creating growth mindset, listening and learning something you don't know, empathy, compassion, generosity. So really the Betterment Pledge is, I will forever be an ally in training, recognizing that my bias and privilege may occasionally cause harm to another. So that it holds you consistently into the space of accountability. So
in the beginning of the book, I posed these questions for the reader. Do you want to be that guy, like the one that subscribes to toxic masculinity? And so when I looked at all of those rhetorical questions in the beginning, I had this idea to flip all of them and to make them into a pledge, so that when someone would subscribe and make those statements live and to live inside them. I've even done this in a training. I've had men say those out loud. It makes it real. So that's a little bit of history behind those, and the correlation between those positive, affirmative, live into pledges and where it came from. So once again, you've done your homework. And I love what you're pulling out.
Well, again, another experience comes to my mind, which is when we talk about abortion. There's a lot about the women's choice. I wrote an article, which is, no, it's also men's choice. And one, how are they part of creation? But also, a lot of men right now also go through not only choosing with the women to abort or keep, but also being responsible for it. But even if they both choose to abort, people look at women's depression and what they go through afterward. I work consistently with women that even though they had the choice and they made the choice, their physical body and their emotions went through depression. The same thing goes with men who go through these choices. And we were in a resort where we were working on trust circles. And one of the questions was, whomever had to go through a decision making about abortion, come forward. I was shocked that the amount of men who came in the middle of the circle were more than females.
Wow.
they were crying, and they shared about what it meant also for them
Yes.
to make that choice. And people don't really realize, and men don't even, give themselves the right to realize that.
Right.
So I think the part of what your work is, which is bringing men to their heart and connection with their feeling, and for that to be mainstream, that it doesn't need to be in therapy sessions with me
No.
or a therapist.
Yes.
This needs to be at work. It needs to be in, where they feel most powerful, to also feel most vulnerable side by side, and bring that into their company and their life and their relationship. I think it's very valuable.
There's this notion of being a guy at work and being a guy at home. I'm seeking to be a guy in life. And that's exactly what you're speaking to. I put in chat for you and for your readers a recent blog I wrote called A Woman's Choice. And it talks about, me being raised Catholic, me understanding that it's not my body, it's not my choice, and understanding the distinction that even, let's keep the politics out of it, but let's really seek to understand, and so what I do is I flipped it on the guys, like, what if, for example, there it is. What if, there's the little advertisement, you had to, before you got married or before you had kids, you had to have a vasectomy. And until you were like this responsible adult, you would have, then you could get it undone. All of a sudden, this notion of these kinds of body choices for men to contemplate makes it real. Yeah. So I think I said it was required that you have a vasectomy until you were deemed financially and emotionally ready. All of a sudden, it puts us guys in the shoes of a woman. Now, mind you, I know that a lot of guys, family guys who, their religious values, so you have input, but what if before you even had relations with a woman, you were thinking about all this ahead of time and you took responsibility for it? It's not just hers, it's yours too. So a lot of the stuff needs to be re-examined.
Absolutely. Now, your ally's journey, acknowledge your stuff.
Yep.
And really take responsibility, really think, talk, and act like an ally. So do you want to explain?
Yeah, so most companies, most men are in the first step, which is acknowledge your stuff. That's dude language for understand your bias, even your fatherly influences. What did the patriarchal figures model for you? How did you see your father and mother relate? All that stuff's cooking in the pot. Understanding what privilege is and what it isn't, not demonizing it, humanizing it. Understanding and connecting to your emotions, and then this thing called the man box, understanding that it's pervasive. That in and of itself is a huge workshop right there, be that as it may. So that's just step one. Moving to step two is listening with empathy and compassion. Has two aspects to it: listening to yourself and listening to others. And what I often tell men is, this is about presencing the lived experiences of other people, not you, them. Because whenever I've done that with men, they begin to understand, and they say things like, oh my God, I had no idea that this was a woman's experience. What do I do? When they ask that question, that is indicative of their empathy roots growing. And then step three, as we start to move into action, that's about be a stand-up guy. If you said or did something that landed negatively, take responsibility for the impact, intended or not, and clean it up. This opens up the door to explore intention versus impact. And then ultimately, where the rubber meets the road, take action, change your behavior. So the think, talk, and think, talk, and act like an ally was a play on the Better Man cards that we have, that I thought, let's bring that into the fourth step so that we can get guys in their right mind, their right heart, and they can shift their language and their behaviors. So that's why I kind of put that towards the end.
Beautiful. everyone. I want to show you the book again, Showing Up, How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace. Share with us anything that we haven't touched upon. And as we're closing in 1 minute.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess what I would say as a white cisgendered male, that we're in this time and space where the Time's Up, Me Too, COVID, and Black Lives Matter all have formed a perfect storm that's put the attention on the majority men. And so the majority of us are good guys. We care. That's why I talk about that care piece in the beginning of the book. But the question for all of us to ponder for ourselves is, do we want to be part of that minority, the few bad apples that's been writing the narrative that we see in the news? And by the way, if we don't do anything from the place of the majority, we're just like them. Or do you want to step out of your comfort zone, put yourself on the path of being an ally, and start to do the work? My hope is that the answer is yes, and there's a lot of ways you can do that. One is go to showingupbook.com and you can order the book, and there's a way to register for a free virtual Better Man ticket for the Better Man conference, November 2nd. If you are a leader in a company and what I'm saying is resonating with you, reach out to me at ray@bettermanconference.com and talk to me about sending a delegation or being a sponsor for our event. So, and go to bettermanconference.com and sign up for our newsletter. We're doing a lot of stuff. I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn Live with Jennifer Brown, a 3-part series. It's free. You can come and learn. That's what this work requires. Yeah, so that's it.
Beautiful. Everyone, go get the book, Showing Up, How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace, and sign up for Better Men Conference. I just love this concept of being an ally. An ally means to all men and women. And I think that it's the essence of, we're so divided right now, that this essence of coming together and cooperating and listening to each other and being, each other's allies and our own, in a sense, the internal part of us, it's so, so important. So thank you so much for being in my show.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing world for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.